I think it's only fair that we continue talking about Boris Johnson's, so we say, best laid plans and how, well, they seem to be coming off the rails. So, Boris Johnson stands triumphant, having successfully edited Theresa May's Brexit deal, or, as we've come to know it now, Theresa May's deal for slow learners. Not for the first time, a man has claimed the credit for a woman's work, but Johnson has really solved the Brexit. But has Johnson really solved the Brexit conundrum, or is it yet another tissue of lies? Will his proposals stand up to the scrutiny of Parliament, and it convenes at the weekend? Here's why Johnson's plans have every chance of falling apart. The first weak point is still Northern Ireland. The plan for maintaining a stable alignment of regulations between the Irish Republic and Northern Ireland might seem reasonable. Stormont is to get a vote every 4 years, with a 2-year cooling off period. But, looking into the future, this quickly collapses. What happens when the rest of the UK decides to follow a different regulatory path, as promised by this hard-right Conservative government? If there can be no land border, then there should be a regulatory checks in the Irish Sea to maintain the integrity of the single market. Moving the border to the Irish Sea would be a significant and practical step towards reunification, but it therefore makes sense that the DUP will not back it. The political limits of one country, two systems are obvious. The real mistake is to analyse this deal on the terms of its own rather than those of the national interest. The important is as to the question of whether it is coherent and durable. This also misses the point of Johnson's deal is predicated on the fact that Britain has more to gain from new trade deals with faraway countries than from maintaining frictionless trade with our nearest neighbours, which already account for half our trade, as part of the world's most powerful trading bloc. The government's own figures show that a hard Brexit outside the customs union and single market will leave every household about £2,000 more poorer. In truth, Brexit is best understood as a prism through which an argument about the future of the country has been reflected. That's why the argument over the level playing field provisions in the political declaration is so important. For the ERG, the strategic purpose of Brexit has always been to deregulate at home in order to strike trade deals with the US and emerging markets, since the most modern trade deals are less about tariffs and more about regulation. And their political goal is to realign Britain from the EU to the US. Meanwhile, wavering Labour MPs have sought assurances on high standards, workers' rights and environmental protections, which are all essential to keeping British a social democracy with a mixed economy. But various versions of the future cannot be true. It is a matter of opinion. It is not a matter of opinion, but logic. Britain cannot be Sweden and Singapore at the same time. It cannot be in the US regulatory sphere and the EU sphere simultaneously. So how has Johnson done this? The key is the different status of the withdrawal agreement and political declaration. While the political declaration is entirely domestic law, it is only a statement of intent, and it lacks the enduring status of an international treaty commitment. Johnson can therefore promise the ERG that after winning a majority in the general election, that he will set aside the political declaration and pivot towards deregulation and a sweetheart trade deal with Donald Trump. The ERG have plainly been led to believe that Johnson's deal will allow their version of the future to flourish, or it would it not be supporting it? So Labour MPs will have to think very carefully and ask themselves if Johnson is lying to them and the British people, which he is, or if he is instead trying to lie to the ERG. Those who voted for this deal will not just have to believe what he has said, they will have to trust that his future intentions and the ability to deliver on them. If Johnson succeeds and proceeds to sell off the NHS to Donald Trump while slashing workers' rights and environmental protections, then history will put any Labour MP who has allowed it to happen in the top tier of useful idiots of our era. And it will all to deliver a deal that weakens our economy, diminishes our influence, and divides our country. It is an awfully large gamble to take on a man whose rise to power has revealed a void where the moral character should belong. And that's completely true. As we said earlier this week, any Labour MP will be branded and should be absolutely hounded out of the Labour Party. They should be no longer allowed to sit as a Labour MP. That is just completely against all things. And as we have seen, Johnson has no morals. He will not keep to any plan. He will go for whatever is politically expedient. So if that means he gets a majority, then he will do the ERG's bidding. And that means all the regulation, social protections, workers' rights, the NHS, gone and sold to get a trade deal with Donald Trump. And that's essentially what will happen. And the only way to break that will then be to join the EU. So, regardless of whatever happens, the ideal one is to remain, which is what I hope we do. Any path, if Brexit happens, all paths lead back to the EU. It might take 5 or 10 years, but we'll do it. We will be back in the EU, and all of that will be worth nothing. All this trouble, all this strife, all this stuff that people blamed on the EU was never the fault of the EU. It was always the fault of our government, and austerity being the key point in all this. It was the Tory government that did this. Can you trust a Tory government that did austerity, thinking that it was a good idea, and still thinks that austerity is a good idea? How can you trust them once we're out of the EU? You can't. So you have to put a Labour government in. And then the Labour government is full of Remainers. So hence, we'll go back to the EU. And guess what? There is already now, as you can see, the biggest march ever for EU membership ever in the history of this country. That will not go away. Because all it will do is get bigger and bigger and bigger. And guess what they might do? Oh, well, I'll tell you what, we'll create our own version of UKIP. And then we'll start to go, our sole priority is just to get back in the EU. And we'll just end up back in. It's pointless. All the evidence shows that us being out of the EU is fundamentally worse than being in it. And yet people are deluding themselves into stupid propaganda, thinking that immigrants are the problem from the EU when they're not. We've seen there was a program on a couple of weeks ago that there was a guy in a pub saying, "Oh, we can get our empire back." Back from where? Are we suddenly going to start building warships now and start going to war with India? To reclaim India? No, that's not going to happen. But there you go.